In 1962, an illegal FBI wiretap recorded two mobsters discussing how Gambino Family Captain Neil DELLACROCE was nearly beaten to death in 1961. Let's check out the transcript of their conversation. In a previous video, I covered the rarely discussed incident of when Gambino Family Captain Neil DELLACROCE was savagely beaten by members of the Gallo crew in 1961. Today, we're going to examine a 1962 FBI wiretap transcript of two mobsters discussing this vicious assault, where they state that DELLACROCE was lucky to be alive. For those who haven't seen my previous video on Neil DELLACROCE's beating, here is a quick summary of events. At the start of the 1960s, Profaci family soldiers Larry and Joe Gallo, along with their followers, rebelled against family boss Joseph Profaci. In 1961, the Gallo crew, as they were known, even kidnapped several high-ranking members of the Profaci family. The Gallos were considered by some to be loose cannons, and as such were feared by a great deal of mobsters across the five families. And then, in September 1961, they assaulted Gambino Captain Agnello DELLACROCE at the Luna restaurant in Manhattan, as stated in the following FBI file. On September 21, Agnello DELLACROCE was dining at the Luna restaurant in Lower Manhattan when he was suddenly attacked by a gang of Gallo strong-arm men. Beaten and kicked unmercifully, he suffered severe injuries and reportedly would have been killed if some of Vito Genovese's soldati soldiers had not intervened and stopped the attack. Sources indicate that the Gallo crew member mainly responsible for the savage attack on DELLACROCE was a mobster called Larry Big Lollipops Carner. Larry Carner was the older brother of mobster Joseph Jr. Lollipops Carner. In 1962, an illegal FBI wiretap recorded a conversation between Gambino family mobster Francesco Frankie Martin Barranca and Genovese soldier Michelino Mike Clemente, discussing the vicious beating dished out to Neil DELLACROCE. Frankie Martin Barranca was a Gambino soldier in Neil DELLACROCE's crew, along with his brother Joseph Barranca. The Barranca brothers were the sons of Bonanno crime family mobster Stefano Steve Barranca, as shown in this FBI file. Allegedly, Frankie Martin was considered to have been close with Neil DELLACROCE, and at one point was his right-hand man, as stated in the following FBI file. On December 10th, 1968, MMT13 advised that there was a meeting held on December 8th, 1968 at the Les Violins restaurant, Miami, attended by Santo Trafficante, Frank Martin, and Anthony Plate. Martin, whose real name is unknown to source, is described by source as the number one man to Agnello DELLACROCE, Brooklyn, New York, member of the Gambino LCN family. Frank Barranca and his brother Joseph operated out of the Red Hook area of Brooklyn, and Frankie Martin had his own turbulent relationship with the Gallos, which I will touch on later. Michelino Mike Clemente was a Genovese soldier in the crew of Rocco the Old Man Pellegrino, and then his successor, Rosario Saro Mogavero. Mike Clemente was a very well-respected Genovese mobster who was a powerful figure on the New York waterfront. Clemente being the real power behind a man called Fred Field, who was the business organizer of Local 856 and the official leader of the East Side Piers. As one FBI file states, Michelino Clemente is the man behind Field, and is the underworld boss for these particular piers. Clemente, according to NYT2, continues to dictate to Field all actions that are conducted by Field with regard to labour matters, jobs, etc. on the East Side Piers. Genovese soldier Mike Clemente was also trying to push Gambino mobster Anthony Tough Tony Anastasio off the docks. Tough Tony being the brother of the slain mob boss Albert Anastasia. As one FBI file states, Clemente is still attempting to cause the ousting of Anastasia from the Brooklyn piers and is in continual contact with underworld representatives such as Peter DeFeo and Thomas Eboli, Tommy Ryan. Clemente's complaint, according to NYT2, is that these individuals will do nothing to Anastasia and keep telling Clemente that he must have patience. In the 1970s, sources state that the respected Mike Clemente would eventually report directly to Genovese family hierarchy member Frank Funzi Thierry. And so, after that bit of background on Gambino mobster Frankie Martin Barranca and Genovese soldier Mike Clemente, let's take a look at the FBI transcript of their conversation about Neil DELLACROCE's beating. In this transcript of the wiretap recording, Mike Clemente is listed as subject. It reads, Frank, yeah, they did it wrong. Subject, yeah, they did it wrong. Now here's a guy. If it wasn't for a couple of guys with us, that's with Pete DeFeo, the old man would have been killed. Agnello. If they weren't there, they would have killed him on the floor. Frank, a couple of guys with Pete? Subject, yeah. Frank, no, it was a couple of kids from the neighborhood. Subject, yeah, they were with Pete then. Frank, no. Subject, yeah, I'm telling you, Frank. Frank, no, it was that kid Carmine, that kid with Rocky, and Rocky is with Tommy Ryan. These kids hang out in Agnello's joint. Subject, yeah, but I'm telling you, there were a couple of kids there with Pete. Alright, let's forget who was there. But here's a guy that gets a beating. He's still a Kappa regime. He's in your family. You're building this guy up. In other words, how much respect you got for your own family. There are several interesting points to note in Frankie Martin and Mike Clemente's conversation. Clemente states the severe nature of the beating to DELLACROCE, stating twice that he would have been killed if members of the Genovese family hadn't stepped in. If they weren't there, they would have killed him on the floor, Clemente is recorded saying. Mike Clemente says that the guys who saved DELLACROCE were with Pete DeFeo. Pete DeFeo was a Genovese family captain who was a powerful figure down Mulberry Street in Manhattan's Little Italy. Frankie Martin Barranca, who, as mentioned, was a soldier in Neil DELLACROCE's crew, then disputes that it was members of DeFeo's crew who came to DELLACROCE's assistance. Frankie Martin saying, no, it was a couple of kids from the neighborhood. And then he adds, no, it was that kid Carmine, that kid with Rocky, and Rocky is with Tommy Ryan. These kids hang out in Agnello's joint. Tommy Ryan, of course, being Genovese family powerhouse, Thomas Tommy Ryan Eboli. In the end, it appears that they decide to agree to disagree on who stepped in to save DELLACROCE. Mike Clemente then says something which is very interesting. Here's a guy that gets a beating. He's still a Kappa regime. He's in your family, meaning Frank's family. But you're building this guy up. In other words, how much respect you got for your own family. There was no comeback from the Gambino crime family towards the gallows after the beating of Neil DELLACROCE. It can be speculated that Mike Clemente is inferring that it shows a lack of respect from the Gambinos towards one of their captains, that no one from the Gallo crew was hit in retaliation. I cover the aftermath of the DELLACROCE beating in my previous video, which indicates some possible reasons as to why there was no retribution for the savage attack on the Gambino Family Captain. The link for this video is in the comments below. This section of the FBI transcript finishes with a summary of the conversation. It states, subject may be referring to the reported beating of Agnello DELLACROCE in the Luna restaurant by members of the Gallo group, which was previously reported by 3 separate sources of the NYO. The Carmine mentioned above is possible Carmine Persico. The Rocky is not further identified. The FBI is speculating that the Carmine that Frankie Martin mentions is Carmine Persico. However, this is most likely an inaccurate assumption on their part. Persico had been with the Gallo crew in the initial stages of their rebellion against Joseph Profaci, but then switched sides, and was even involved in the assassination attempt of Larry Gallo in August 1961, only 1 month before the DELLACROCE beating. If Carmine Persico had been at Luna Restaurant at that time, then his presence would have only escalated the situation. On a separate note, Frankie Martin Barranca would have his own issues with the Gallos. In 1963, Larry Gallo had once tried to order a hit on Barranca over a dispute over territory in the numbers rackets. One FBI file states, redacted name advised recent past that Larry Gallo desires to hit Frank Barranca, aka Frank Martin, over a conflict in numbers operation. Barranca allegedly with Gambino Family. And so, why was Gambino Crime Family Captain Neil DELLACROCE attacked by the Gallos? Some sources suggest that the Gallo crew discovered that Neil DELLACROCE had been advising members of the Profaci family in the war against them. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.